Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where I interview experts from around the world on subjects such as leadership, diversity, visibility, and how to really run a good team. Today, we're talking about mental health in the workplace, which is something that I've been wanting to address, and I'm so excited to have my dear friend, Darren Hollingsworth of Odonata Coaching to talk to us. Before we start though, if you tuned in because you're curious about how to be a better presenter, you can find out how your presentation skills are doing by taking our free 4-minute assessment at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. That's where in 4 minutes you can see where your presentation skills are strong and where maybe you need a little bit of support to get the results that you want and the recognition that you deserve. If you score high enough, you will get a free 45-minute assessment with me to discuss those results. Today, I am very happy to have Darren Hollingsworth here. Darren Hollingsworth has had a thriving career as a financial advisor, a sales professional, a senior fundraising professional, and a nonprofit executive. He's run nonprofits. And now he's working as a speaker and a facilitator and a coach. He helps successful professionals and organizations move from surviving to thriving. And the rest of the official part of the bio goes like this. Darren is a skilled facilitator who works with businesses, nonprofit executives, and boards of directors to create new possibilities for transformational organizational culture. Darren empowers clients to build upon strengths and face challenges with curiosity, confidence, and expertise. He's a student and a practitioner of the research on gratitude and appreciation in the workplace for more than 15 years. That means before it was fashionable, before people really realized how important that was. Darren is a frequent speaker to inspire leaders and organizations. He had formerly produced and hosted over 70 episodes of a podcast called Working Gratitude, Real People, Real Gratitude at Work. In these conversations, Darren has explored ways that gratitude can shift individual perspective and organizational culture. He's a certified facilitator with Appreciation at Work, which is the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace. He's a native of Memphis, Tennessee, and lives in Jackson, Tennessee. He volunteers to bring his work to small nonprofits, and he's passionate about mental health and suicide prevention. He has an interesting passion project. In 2021, he served as the chair of the AFSP Jackson. It's the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention in Jackson, Tennessee, and they have an Out of the Darkness walk for suicide prevention and mental health awareness. He also paints and then hides kindness rocks to promote the walk and to raise money for the cause. He has displayed rocks and literature at special events leading up to the walk. Mental health in the workplace, mental wellness, and recognizing that mental health is as important and as devastating as physical health or illness, this is a topic that's very important. I've been meaning to get to this for some time. I'm so delighted to have had a chance to interview Darren Hollingsworth. Here's the conversation. Darren Hollingsworth, welcome to Speakers Who Get Results.
It is so great to see you and visit with you again, Elizabeth.
It's really great. Well, I interviewed you several years ago on a different show, and then you were mostly just talking about gratitude in those days, and I kept replaying that episode about gratitude. Let's do gratitude at Christmas time too, and all of that. Now we have an international audience, so we can talk more about issues that come up in everybody's workplace.
Yeah.
So talking about mental health in the workplace. But before I dive into that, let me ask you about your dream interview. If you were to interview someone who's not necessarily available, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening?
Wow. Okay. I think as you asked the trailing questions, I was thinking differently along the way. So if they were available, as in living still in this spirit, I really want to sit down with Brene Brown and have a conversation about, her journey and her vulnerability and everything that she teaches, because I just believe in her work so much because it's so research-based. I'm a bit of a research geek myself, so I like having the knowledge to go along with what my gut is telling me. But then on a more sentimental side, honestly, my dad's been deceased for 34 years, and I would probably sit and try to get as much wisdom. I got a lot from him in the 19 years that I was with him, but I would probably sit and try to pick his brain for some more contemporary wisdom and knowledge.
Are you older now than he was when he passed?
Interesting question. It will actually be, this is the year that I turn the age that he was when he passed. So it's very present for me.
Very present. Yeah, that will be. It's interesting when I ask this question of all my guests, and there's quite a few have listed an ancestor of some sort and who they would like to talk to. So
I think we all have a bit of affinity for reaching out to people that we wish we had spoken more with,
right.
Whether it's in the professional environment or our personal environment. I definitely think so.
My mother's father died when my mother was 17. So I know almost nothing about him. And my mother's mother was very present in our lives. My father's parents lived on the other side of the country, so I didn't see them that often. But I would like to talk to both of them for different reasons, especially my mother's mother, who died when I was 24. And I was right out of college. I was all involved in my own life. And I wish I'd been smart enough to have sat with her and gotten more of her stories instead of just being all involved in me. But I think every child goes through that.
My dad died when I was 19. So I had a lot of time with him, actually. Gratefully, to go back to my gratitude work, I got to spend time with my dad because he was retired on disability. And so in that way, I am immensely grateful. But when you're, an adolescent, you're still not latching on to everything that's there. I wish I had learned to cook from him. He was a great cook, but I certainly didn't do
that. Okay.
Not in my wheelhouse.
Channel him for some lessons. Yes.
Right.
You have a medium come in and help you and get some recipes.
Yeah.
Well, today we're talking about mental health in the workplace, which is such an important topic. And there's a stigma. It's one of those things that you're not supposed to talk about. I'm curious about the work that you've done and what you talk about now when you talk about you helping, when you're helping companies create policies to
Mhm.
deal with mental health in the workplace?
Well, a lot of my experience is very personal and less from the professional perspective. I have to always do the disclaimer that I am not a licensed counselor, therapist, or otherwise, but I have a lot of lived experience, both in the workplace and in my own mental health journey. That being said, when I'm working with organizations, particularly nonprofits that are faced with stressors that some for-profit organizations never even realize, I talk about mental health in the workplace as part of organizational culture, along with my gratitude work, my compassion in the workplace. It all fits together. It's about leaders being aware of the stigma that you just mentioned. It's about leaders acknowledging, really doing their own work and keeping themselves healthy so that they can overflow into the lives of their colleagues, and having the recognition of when there is a need for empathy, but beyond empathy, to take action for an employee who's dealing with a mental health issue. That's when compassion really comes into play. Is taking action on empathy is what I'm seeing and what I'm trying to communicate to employers.
Well, you mentioned mental health, gratitude, and compassion. I'm picturing a Venn diagram there. And
that's
so,
good.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the mental health part would be, but the gratitude, because mental health is an overall category, and gratitude and compassion are actions, feelings.
Interesting. Yeah. The feelings of gratitude and compassion generally translate into actionable work. From that perspective, I would actually offer that being aware of mental health, and as really as prominent as physical health in the workplace. You have occupational health and safety for physical injuries. We don't necessarily have that for mental health, or it's not as readily available. But there are actions associated with that mental health bubble that can be cultivated, and that's why there is that overlap with gratitude and compassion.
Maybe it's awareness, gratitude, and compassion.
Correct. Awareness, and being willing to take action about where there's a gap or where there's an obvious, when something is illuminated in an environment. And this happened for me in a mental health crisis that I went through in 2018. I worked for a major nonprofit, and I was in a job that I absolutely loved, raising large gifts for a mission that I believed in so strongly. But I was stressed, and beyond stress, there was anxiety, depression, and some PTSD. Not to the fault of that employer, but as I progressed in my illness, there was just a lack of awareness of how to deal with me and how to deal with my necessary short-term disability leave. The staff member who was assigned to me to help me through the process really had only dealt with short-term leave in the term of like maternity leave or paternity leave. So there was just a lot of different questions that I had and that she had that we had to navigate together. Subsequently, that organization learned a lot through my experience and was able to help a lot more people get comfortable with raising their hand and saying, I don't have a physical health crisis right now, but I'm experiencing a mental health crisis and I need help. So that's my point of gratitude. One of my points of gratitude for my personal journey is that it did overflow into the workplace in a way that has made some of my colleagues able to get and receive compassion more readily than it was available to me.
Because of you, the door for conversations was opened.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about guilt from your point of view and from the point of view of your colleagues.
Yeah. Well, as I said, that was definitely part of the stress. When you are working for an organization you believe in that's taking care of very vulnerable populations, and the nonprofit sector is full of that, you just feel compelled to get up and do your work. But on those days when you're experiencing horrible anxiety or onset major depression, and you don't feel like getting out of bed, the diagnosis is compounded by guilt, because you're like, these children and their families, or this population experiencing homelessness are conquering battles every day that I should be able to overcome. Well, I've said for a long time in my practice and seen a lot of affirmation that we can should all over ourselves and make a really big mess. So guilt is like a should to me. We feel it, we've got to be present with it, but it has to be practiced as a temporary condition that will pass. And guilt is very past based on some life experience or some imposed guilt. And I will say that in an organization that has strength in delivery of its mission, there can be an undercurrent of, hold it together, we got to do this for our mission.
The show must go on.
Exactly.
In my life.
Yeah, in your work, absolutely.
Yeah, the show must go on. It actually makes me think of a very dark time in my life where the career I thought I had disappeared underneath me. I liken it to being fired without actually having been told you've been fired. You just don't get hired again. And at the same time, in my living situation, the people I were living with were dealing with the death of a family member. So I felt guilty to talk about my pain. And yet my identity had been erased because nobody wanted me for what I was doing at that point. I was the product. And
you were grieving and they were grieving. It was just two different types of grief.
Yes. And I kept telling myself, well, yes, but nobody died. So get over it. And it didn't really, until the day that I broke down and said, what about me? My whole dream has disappeared. Then that was where things started to turn around. But I did about 6 months of stuffing that down. So it is similar, not necessarily exactly the same. But
it has parallels,
feeling.
exactly. And things you say very much relate to that sense of grief or loss of identity in a position. And in the workplace, so many of us are identified by our work. And I know that I did at that time, particularly workaholism is a very real diagnosis for addictive behavior and self-medicating. And so it's very common for people to thrust themselves into their work in a way that does cover up those other emotions. But then when those emotions are properly dealt with, it can be a painful recovery process. So I hear you for sure. And I do think that that sense of comparative suffering, and if you've not explored that topic, or your listeners and viewers have not looked at comparative suffering, it's something we all need to take notice of. And again, I refer back to Brene Brown, when early in the pandemic, she was illuminating how different each of us were coping in those first days of lockdown. So I like exploring that topic a lot.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about comparative suffering, because it leads to my next question, which is, how about the people who've never had mental health issues, and the feeling that the other person is just using this as an excuse not to come to work? Or rather, let's say there are people who will abuse it.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
And so the fact that some people abuse the opportunity to not have to go to work is not, doesn't invalidate the very real issues that other have. How do we balance that? How do we walk that line?
You know, excuse me one second. Transparency in that is part of the balance. Is instead of saying I have to go to a doctor's appointment when I need to take off an hour to go to a therapy appointment, I speak what is truth. That and that became my leader's knowledge of that. Even though I was already in therapy, it was in my toolkit, and they knew that I was working to take care of myself. Just like if someone was going to the doctor regularly for some other issue and another one pops up unexpectedly. That's how we have to look at this. You have to cultivate a culture of integrity and appreciation so that people feel valued and trusted. So that if they are needing to deal with an issue that is stigmatized, which mental health is, they have a sense of psychological safety to come forward with whatever is appropriate to disclose in their journey of diagnosis. And that's why it's a slippery slope about how much do you talk about, when do you talk about it, and it has to be cultivated over time and practiced. Just like people used to not speak the word pregnant. I remember when I was a kid. Now, I was raised in the South with some interesting cultural norms, but my grandmother, if an uncle or aunt or older cousin was pregnant, she would spell the first 4 letters of the word in front of us, thinking we couldn't spell and didn't know what was going on. For years we didn't speak cancer. People said, or it would be, oh, cancer, spoken under the breath. So, or
divorce.
Absolutely.
Another one. Yeah,
absolutely.
I remember when nobody talked about, well, why is Susie's dad not around?
Right. Yeah. And again, then we circle back to Elizabeth, some of the core things that can be either triggering or very different. For example, we talked about grief earlier. Grief in the loss of a family member, a loved one, grief in the loss of an identity, a job, grief in the loss of life as we knew it, for example. But grief does not automatically lead to a major depressive episode. And discussion of grief and processing of grief properly as an emotionally intelligent community helps us. It can help us avoid incidents of major depression, but the two are not the same. And I hope that as people talk more and listen more and look for more research, they'll understand. And kind of back to your question of will people abuse it? We have to have some grace and generosity of spirit to trust people, but also to understand that you may be very, very sad, but you may not be clinically depressed. There again, it is not my armchair diagnosis or my experience that can diagnose you. So I can be a listening ear for you, but just like if someone was having palpitations, or what they described to me as palpitations or anxiety, even, anxiety can present as a cardiovascular issue, but you can't ignore it. Because of that, people don't ignore, or too many people do ignore the signs and symptoms of heart and stroke issues. But the point being is you don't need to ignore it, and you've got to get it professionally examined. And if you go and get the tests done and the results come back negative, you can move forward from what you know. But moving forward from what you don't know is very, very difficult.
And yes, of course. And the fear of the unknown is always the worst. The anticipation is always the worst, which is easier said than done. I mean, I hear the words coming out of my mouth and I think, goodness, that sounds so glib. And it's, If someone had said that sort of thing to me when I was in the depths of some of my worst times, I would have slapped them. So,
Yeah, we have to let people be where they are, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and it also makes me think about people who are suffering from addiction.
Oh, right.
And you can't just tell them to stop. They have to be ready. You can't just tell someone to stop drinking.
Right.
Yeah.
And for me, that is important to in the recovery movement and the recovery and addiction as part of the mental health umbrella. We did not get here, most of us, it was not entirely a quick incidental single issue.
Yes.
We got a lot of work to do. And that it took us time to get here, and it may take time to get healthy. I think it would be good for me, Elizabeth, if we also talk about like mental health in building mental wellness, like we build physical health and physical wellness, right?
Yes, absolutely. Please, let's talk about what can we do.
And that's where I've shared with you an article, and you're welcome to share it with your listeners and viewers.
I will put it in the show notes. Absolutely.
My toolkit, and it's available on Medium and on LinkedIn. But it really was in this particular, as I came out of my illness, it took definitely 6 months, end of 18 and early 19, as I got healthy. My therapist and I talked about, what could I do with this? How could I use it to my advantage for future prevention, but also to others? And so I did a self-examination of what I had before I got sick and how I was able to sometimes not see those things. So it was my toolkit. And that may include anything from, we've already talked about my gratitude work. So a practice of gratitude in the workplace, because we're talking a lot about work, can cultivate a psychological safety. And it's not, it's best executed peer-to-peer, because other appreciation can be expressed in rewards and recognition. But that peer-to-peer cultivation of acknowledging someone's success and praising them for it. So a practice of gratitude is a starting baseline. Then other practices may be anything from the appropriate amount of sleep to the appropriate amount of exercise to being in therapy, being adherent to medications, building the soft landing pad of support for people around you who know you well enough to see a change in behavior, and being brave enough to speak it to you. Excuse me. It's early morning my time when we're recording.
Right.
So I've got morning voice. But I had that toolkit, and I will acknowledge simply, kind of like when you said there were things that people could have said to you when you were in your darkest moments that you would have just not been receptive to. I could not even find my toolkit once I broke down, let alone reach into it and use it. However, as I got healthier through my network of support, through the good therapy and appropriate medication that I had, then I could start to see where the toolkit, it was there. I just couldn't reach for it. And that is what I hope to help people cultivate proactively as mental health and mental wellness before the crisis onsets.
It sounds to me like you're saying practice these tools before you need them.
Correct. They become much more emotional muscle memory if you've had a healthy practice of them and you have a compromised condition that disables you from practicing them regularly. Getting back to them is easier than starting them fresh while you're in crisis.
I remember somebody once saying to me when I was in a very dark time, and I said, "Does it ever get any easier?" And he said, "It doesn't get easier, but it gets faster." because you have tools.
Yep.
Will you tell us what the tools are? We don't have to wait for the show notes.
Yeah, you don't have to wait for the articles at all.
Let's tell people what the tools are, please.
Yeah, I've already mentioned gratitude as a very important baseline practice. And what I say for people who are struggling is if you can't find gratitude in the moment, and there are some things during the time of this recording, for example, that are fresh on our minds that I cannot find gratitude for. And I'll call attention to the recent death by disease of mental illness, death by suicide of Naomi Judd. And
Naomi Judd, for our international listeners, Naomi Judd was a very famous country music singer and about to be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. And
pinnacle of her career.
The pinnacle of her career. And she was not alive to attend the ceremony. And
so that experience, and then recent mass shootings in the United States, as recently as the one in Buffalo, and then one that I don't even have full knowledge of yet, but in California. Those types of events, I cannot immediately find gratitude for. However, there's a beautiful quote from Mr. Rogers. And again, I think Mr. Rogers is probably pretty international by this time, but it says, look for the helpers. And it is during these times that are so devastating based on the events that happen. At the event, there's nothing to be grateful for. It is the people who step up during these times that I can start to be grateful for and speak truth and speak compassion and act compassionately. Because there is grief surrounding these times, there are layered emotions, and grief is not a linear process. There will be a lot of anger. I have it myself many times. And with a practice of gratitude, I'll take it back to that, we can respond to some of the other emotions rather than react to them.
Okay.
Similarly, a second practice is a practice of meditation or mindfulness, getting present with your very own breath, one day at a time, one step at a time. There's tons of research, and I refer people all of the time to the articles like that. Harvard Business Review has really started stepping up their content on mental health in the workplace. So there's tons of resources there. The Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley has a whole center for emotional health and well-being. And really, most of the respected universities across the country that I go to for research Stanford, for example, has a Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, CCARE, where all of this is validated. So what I'm giving as tools are tools that I gathered because I researched them. Another one after mindfulness is kindness. And we've looked, popular culture, if you will, has looked at the random act of kindness beautifully. And I like that, but I've come to see the more intentional act of kindness as a practice that helps me more. And for me, that on a very personal level, that is painting kindness rocks. It's a creative outlet for me.
Kindness rocks?
Okay.
I
paint little rocks with encouraging sayings on them. I started this during the pandemic. I never knew I could paint or draw. And suddenly I become a little rock artist. I would call myself a little bit more of a rock hobbyist, but nonetheless, I can put a pen to a rock, a brushstroke to a rock, and kind of release some of my self-editing. And then the beautiful part of it is whatever I create, I very intentionally put out into the world in a park or a parking lot or something for someone to find randomly. But my act of kindness was intentional. Does that make sense?
Yes.
They found it randomly, received it randomly, but the
you
giver,
were intentionally spreading signs of kindness.
Correct.
In your community.
Correct. Another practice, and again, I've come to look at these as practice as much as tools, practice communicating with friends and family that you love and trust. And in the workplace, we have to establish that psychological safety. And there's a ton of great work on psychological safety. I think of another podcast I listened to from the Wharton Business School, and how it is becoming so important for leaders to be keenly aware of their own ability to bully. Really, we hear bullying, and in the LGBT community, since we're this will publish as part of Pride Month, we hear a lot about bullying, and many of us have experienced a lot about bullying because of being gay or lesbian. In the workplace, bullying happens in a very different way, but it absolutely happens.
And microaggressions. You
correct.
Hear that term, yes.
Absolutely. And with the racial lack of equity that is evident, and the hate that is evident from the recent shootings that we've talked about, those microaggressions are very real and have to be sometimes painfully uncovered. It's like doing the work of your own personal mental health journey. It can be painful working through those, but the win is doing it and doing the work. Another practice is being active. Keep moving. It's when, from my experience with major depression particularly, it is just easier to sit at home and veg. And that can appear, again, to the stigma, otherwise that can appear very lazy. But
like you're just lying on the couch all day.
It's disabling. It is absolutely disabling. It's like if you've got a massive headache. I don't experience migraines, thankfully, but I know people who are literally disabled by migraines. If you think of depression or severe anxiety or triggering events, they can really knock you down and throw you out. Another practice is good nutrition. Your body and your body chemistry that helps affect serotonin levels and dopamine levels are all impacted by what you're taking in, be it the continuum of sugar to alcohol and everything in between. How you've got to know how your body processes chemistry so that you know how to, and you need to know this in advance so that you know if you can talk with your medical professionals about whether your medication is doing what they thought it might do for you. So
that candy bar when I'm depressed is maybe not such a good idea. I'm medicating with chocolate. But here's the thing.
In the moment, but if you just do that every 30 minutes, you maybe have a problem.
I was making a joke about that, but actually, and because medicating with chocolate we make a joke about it, but indeed it's real.
It is for some people. It is for some people.
Yeah, eating an entire cake at one sitting rather than feel the feelings.
And that's a great lead in, Elizabeth, to a practice that I also try to have in that toolkit, is that of savoring. You can eat one chocolate bar and really enjoy it and look at it. And I know because of where you spend a lot of your life, you have access to really good chocolate.
Yes.
So you are less likely to eat a chocolate bar than a beautiful morsel or cordial, but savoring that, looking at the craftsmanship of how it was made, taking a bite of it in your mouth and not the whole thing at one time, and feeling the layers of texture. And I think translating this work then to the professional environment, savoring an experience at work. You have a success. Let's take a moment to enjoy that before we go on to the next one, right?
Yes.
And let's take a moment to thank and appreciate. So it's woven in with gratitude, but let's take a moment to realize who all helped in that success and making that success possible. So savoring is one that I learned from the discipline of positive psychology and the power of positivity and several other books, that you take a moment that is meaningful and healthy and useful to you and see what you can create that could be a shift for you in another situation where you're needing to get out of a crisis of depression or anxiety. with the practice of savoring, you know that you have experienced better performance in the workplace from yourself or others. So calling attention back to that in a mindful and healthy way is very important.
Darin, this has been really interesting. I could talk to you for hours, but I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna inflict that on our listeners. If we could, as a leader, say you're a leader, you're a manager, you've got a team, or you're a leader of a company, where could somebody start?
That is always a really great question in the cycle, particularly of gratitude and compassion. And so I would say this: I believe truly that everyone can be a leader from the seat that they sit in. So they can influence from exactly where they are by staying healthy themselves, by sharing openly things they are exploring. And then that transfers exponentially to the person assigned to a leadership role. Those people have to be healthy because they report to higher ups and they have people that take care of them. And, most of my work, a lot of my work is in the nonprofit setting, and particularly for executive directors. They're so frequently an island because they may have a small staff that is counting on them to be the leader,
the strong one, and the leader,
strong
yes.
one. But they report to a board of directors of people who do very successful things in other disciplines. So bridging that. And so taking care of yourself at that leadership level, and then being very aware of things like gratitude, appreciation at work, compassion in the workplace, that transfer from empathy to active compassion is where leaders are going to have to continue to do more work and do more practice and create more tools. Yeah.
Darin, this has been fascinating. Just tell us before we go, what does Odonata, you're called your practice Odonata coaching. What does Odonata mean?
Thank you for asking, because it is a word that sometimes trips me up, but I absolutely love dragonflies. They've been a symbol for me of transformation and change. They not unlike a butterfly, they change from one little creature through a metamorphosis to a very efficient flyer. They see in almost 360 degrees. They can move in any direction very nimbly. And they're great predators of mosquitoes. So I love them, and I think they have a lot of symbolism in the workplace. When I do work with people, each of the four wings move independently. So I encourage people to find those four wings on a body of gratitude and keep a vision and a curiosity like the dragonfly sees 360 degrees. And it's just a way for me to help bring attention to something that I enjoy in nature.
I love metaphors anyway, so that's a wonderful metaphor. Darren Hollingsworth, thank you so much, my friend. I've been really wanting to get you back onto the podcast, so this has been wonderful, and we may have to circle around and get you on here again, because I know we only barely scratched the surface.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again, Elizabeth.
Thank you for joining us. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host. And let me remind you that if you're curious about how your presentation skills are doing, you can take our free assessment at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where in only 4 minutes, you can discover where you are strong with your presentation skills and where a little support could get you the results you need and the recognition you deserve. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'll see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes. And thanks for tuning in.